Welcome, everybody, to this podcast, Homegrown Family. I'm Joe Metler, your podcast host. Thanks for listening. So today, I wanted to start off with just sharing some different resources. I did read an interesting statistic the other day while reading the Farmer's Almanac of 2023, and that was that 16% of people who try to garden fail. So I wanted to just throw out some different books that I've had on my shelf, and to be honest with you, I'm pretty bad at ordering books and then only reading through part of it. But I have some interesting books and resources here I just want to share. The first one is a book I do not own, but I saw it in the Farmer's Almanac. I referenced as the Vegetable Gardener's Handbook, and it advertised it as how to grow 30 plus vegetables. I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find it. I'll probably throw a link in the show notes. You'll probably be able to find that below on your apps. But two books that I do own, one titled Producing Vegetable Crops, and that's the 5th edition by John M. Schwader, Swiader, and George W. Ware, Ware. And this is one that I haven't really read yet. I think I picked it up off of the excess pile at the NDSU offices. Sometimes professors will get rid of their old books. And so this is one I picked up recently that I haven't read yet. And then the book that I have read a little bit more of, titled Mini Farming Self-Sufficiency on a Quarter Acre. This is kind of like a book maybe geared towards your small-scale farming, homestead type situations where you get a 5-acre lot, out in the country, or a 10-acre lot out in the country, and you go in and it gives all this information anywhere from saving, selecting, and buying seeds to improving soil through composting, how to utilize soil rotations and different organic methods, canning, freezing, dehydrating, and all this type of stuff. So this is an interesting book, and it does talk about how to do plant starts, and that kind of thing. So I just want to kind of throw out some of the different resources there for you guys. And so I'll probably reference these books every once in a while as I'm hopefully continuing to learn as I'm putting out this podcast for you. And one of the things in the mini farming book, it does talk about starting seeds. In our region, I'm talking growing zones, 2 and 3, primarily 3. Southern Minnesota can be growing zone 4. But if you're unfamiliar, and I'll throw a link into the show notes also, that the USDA has growing zones. And on any of your packets of seed that you buy anywhere, you'll see this little spot that says growing zone 4, or 5, or 6, or whatever, So most of my experiences are in zones 2 through 4. And so when I'm talking vegetable gardening and things like that, that's kind of what I'm referring to in that area of the world, or that type of weather pattern and things like that. So it's not too late to start your vegetables, indoors. I think we'll get more into depth on maybe some methodology there on a different podcast, but it's not too late. So I just want to take a minute maybe to talk about where I'm at in my gardening process this year. Well, it's currently April 23rd. I'm recording this podcast a little bit early. You guys won't get to listen to this till about another week from now, but the area of Minnesota and North Dakota this past week, April 20th, almost the whole entire state of Minnesota and then North Dakota got covered with about 4 inches of snow. And I would say that northern half of North Dakota and the northern half of Minnesota even stopped to a foot. So there's still snow on the ground for those of you guys who are not used to seeing snow this late in the year. So it is a little bit of a later year than normal. We still have risks right now with frost. So planting things outdoors really isn't a great option just yet. Although by next weekend, I think I'm going to start planting some more of my winter hardy vegetables, maybe my peas and some of my brassica species. So I might take the risk there as next week, around the end of April, it looks like we're starting to see lows during the days of 30 degrees, 33 degrees, 34 degrees. So the weather's on the up and up. But so there's that. And then I do have a couple things started. I have some romaine lettuce I have out in the garage. I currently don't have any very good window spaces that my toddler isn't going to find and destroy my plants. So I try to keep them away from her. And I have a zucchini plant that I had also started in those flats, but it was starting to outgrow the flats. So my daughter and I just the other day decided to transplant it into a little pot. And so I had her help me with it, put it in a new pot, put new potting mix around it, everything. And I let her hold it, and then we brought it back to the house, and I had her help me water it. And she was pretty protective of it. She seemed pretty proud of it because she just didn't want to let it sit on the shelf, and watch it grow. She wanted to hold on to it, and I had to let her know that it wasn't a toy. It was something I got to watch and grow, and so that was kind of a fun experience. But so that's kind of where we're at right now, currently in the vegetable gardening process. I did want to do a little shout out here quick to a couple of the cities and people that have been listening to my podcast, which is pretty awesome. I had a couple even international listeners. I had some people listening from Germany, which is probably my cousin Tom, so thank you, Tom. Shout out to Tommy. Anyways, I had a couple from California, Washington, North Carolina. So shout out to all you who have listened to this. There's one from the Netherlands, from South Holland. A couple more from St. Cloud, Minnesota, Bismarck, San Francisco, California. That's pretty cool. Otherwise, mostly Minnesota, North Dakota. So, yeah, thank you guys all for listening and participating in this podcast. That being said, if you have any questions or want to learn more about certain topics, shoot me an email at homegrownfam@gmail.com. And then you can also follow me on Twitter at the same domain. So, anyways, I'm going to try to post things on Twitter there, too, in relationship to things as I do them. So if you want to see a picture of my lettuce plants growing, it's on my Twitter feed. So join the fun. Last episode, I learned a little bit about my dad and the farm he grew up on. And so in this episode, turn it around and talk about my mom and the farm that she grew up on. Because when I think of the farm and kind of where my farming background came from, I usually think about my dad's side. Because I spent a lot of time celebrating over there at my grandpa's farm, different events such as Easter and Christmas and Thanksgiving. Relatives came together and participated, and we went and played, in the hay bales in the back shed, and we played football in the yard with all cousins and things. So when I think of the farm, I really do think of mostly on the Mettler side of things. But my mom also did come from a farm, as mentioned in my dad's podcast, which is currently just a mile up the hill from where my parents currently farm. So welcome, Mom. Madre, mi mama.
Hello.
Hi. So that's my mom. Her name is Margaret Mettler. So yeah, I just want to talk a little bit, Mom, about how you grew up. Maybe first tell us about your family dynamics and maybe where are you in line in terms of all your siblings and how large your family was.
Well, I have one sister, and then I have 4 brothers, and then it's me. Well, there was another sister a couple years older than I, but she only lived for a month and then she passed away. So a lot of brothers.
That aunt that I never got to meet was Doris. And I just want to say too, as if you kind of brought that up, and so I just maybe want to shout out to all those mothers out there too and fathers who have experienced like miscarriages and young deaths in their family. That is super hard, and know that you guys aren't alone in that. You have family you can reach out to. I had my sister-in-law, had a miscarriage too early on. That was kind of tough, and so it's a lot more common than you think. Anyways, I just wanted to say that real quick while that came up. But so Mom was the youngest in the family as compared to my dad, who's the second oldest. How much younger, Mom, are you from the one above you?
That would be 5 years. So my sister told me that I don't remember it, but when I was in first grade, she was the one that took me to the classroom. So she was a senior and I was entering first grade because we didn't have kindergarten yet back then.
Because, my Aunt Kathy, being the oldest one, was, 10 years older than you?
Yep, or a little bit more.
Just retired, so actually a lot of your siblings are just recently retired. So anyways, you guys grew up being the youngest on the farm there. Important to mention, too, I guess. It's pretty unfortunate that my grandpa Lawrence, whom I've never met, had passed away at a younger age. And so, Mom, maybe mention that, what happened there, and how old you were when that happened.
Yeah, when I was 13, my dad passed away, and he was 61. I was at home, and my brother John, and my brother Roger. So we were at home yet. And he had not been feeling good for a week or 2, but he went to the doctor, and they didn't find anything wrong. But So it was about 2 weeks after that or so, I believe, when he passed away on the farm. They had went out to check for a cow that they thought would be calving, and when the boys came back, because they had split up between the pastures, and when the boys came back, they found him on the hay rack. So we stayed on the farm for, I don't know, I think it was maybe a year, maybe not quite. My mom and I and my brothers. John had just graduated, and my brother Roger, he was gonna be on the farm for a while. He decided to try that, and after he was married, he had come back, and it didn't quite work out for him either. So Mom ended up selling the farm, but her and I had moved to town when Roger took over. So that was it for my farming after I was about 14. But so something unique that we had on our farm versus your dad's farm was that we had a 10,000 bird chicken barn. The chickens laid eggs, and so our job was to collect those eggs every day after school. My mom would usually take half the barn, and then I would do the other half, or one of my siblings would, when they were still on the farm. So that would take about an hour and a half after school, because we had to take a cart down each aisle, and there were 3 decks, 3 layers high, and so we would have to pick those eggs by hand and put them in these flats, maybe that some people have seen in this grocery store, where there's like 2.5 dozen, I believe, on each gray flat. Some of them are plastic, I suppose, but these were more like cardboard. And when my brothers were still there, I was too young to reach like the second deck high, so I would take my little red wagon along with these flats, and I would pick the bottom layer, and then my older siblings or my mom would pick the top layers that I couldn't reach. So when you were young, you still had a job to do. If you couldn't lift a hay bale, then you had to roll it to where you needed it to be. So.
And I think that system is a little bit different than what my mom and dad currently have. They have a little chicken coop, and they have these chicken boxes, basically, that us siblings always had to go in and reach underneath the chicken and grab the egg. And oftentimes, it was always usually the black Australorps, I think is what they were called. Those ones are always the most mean. They always like to come at and peck you as you're going in there and getting the eggs. They were also the most unique when we first started out, because they had brown eggs. We always had white eggs for the longest time, and then I think as we kind of got older, us kids, we were interested in different colors, or had some 4-H interest. And so Mom's situation, they kind of roll out the bottom of the, you can call it a cage, the space in which they lived, kind of rolled down to the bottom, so they got into a feeder area, or like a trough, where the eggs rolled down. They never had to put their hands into the same area as the chicken, correct?
Right, yep. It would kind of roll off down into a little rack, as you would say, that was hooked onto the cage itself.
I remember, I don't know how long Roger had the farm for, but I do remember there was a little kid going in there one time, and maybe that might have been at your Uncle Rich's place, actually, because he had a chicken barn for a while after he moved away from the farm. And I was there one time when they had some chickens in there still, and I helped him pick the eggs once or twice when I was small.
Yeah, and I think their chicken barn held, I believe, 30,000. So it was bigger. Smokes. Yeah, it was bigger than the one that my mom and dad had. They were one of the first ones to have something like that in this area. So that was, yeah.
That's kind of cool. So you had 10,000 chickens. How many dozen eggs would you get a day? Do you have any guess?
Well, it would depend on their cycle. If as they got older, then they didn't lay quite as often, not like an egg every day, So I'll make your viewers do the math. If you had 9,000 eggs, how many dozen that you would get? But the worst part of the job, well, of course, the smell was kind of potent during the summertime, but you had doors you could open, and they had fans as well. But it was my job, I don't know how I got it, but to take out the birds that passed away. So if it was hot out, you didn't want to miss a chicken that had passed away for very long, because it really wasn't too pleasant trying to take it out of that cage if it had been hot and gone for 5 days.
Yep. I never liked that, even doing that at the farm. Yeah, I had to do the math real quick on my calculator here. So for all those of you who are curious about how many dozen of eggs, so if all 10,000 birds laid an egg, you have 833 and a third dozen. So, but I'd say probably on average, you probably have, 9,000 of them actually laying an egg a day? Something like that. But so either way, it's a ton of dozen of eggs. So where did the eggs go after they left the farm? Did they go to the local grocery store, or did you guys sell to a specific distribution center or something?
There would be a refrigerated truck that would come, because we had to keep the eggs in like a refrigerated area also. So it was probably at least 15 by 15 feet area, and it was a cooler room, basically. And then we would put the flats into cases, and there would be, I believe, 30 dozen in each case. Then that truck would come and get them, and I don't know where they actually went, if it was down by Litchfield maybe somewhere. So, and then they would just take the eggs and they would put, okay, so this is like grade A egg, this is a medium eggs, and then you would also have ones that were maybe cracked or not usable, that they would maybe give you, like the very small amount for, if they would use them first or something.
You guys didn't sort them at the farm, right? They went and sorted them after the fact?
Right. I mean, most of the time, if we had cracked eggs, we would put them out and we would use them ourselves.
Kind of similar to cherries, I think, from my time in Washington, where you bring your batch of eggs or cherries to the distribution center. So you put them on a truck, they brought them to the distribution center, but there they would size them up. So you'd have a certain size, of egg that'd be like a grade A or grade B, jumbo or whatnot. So then they split it off, and you basically get a ticker marker that count all your numbers of those, and then you just get paid upon that value. Similar to cherries, if you had certain ones that were, I forget the millimeter size, 7 to 9 millimeters or wide versus the smaller ones, you get docked for a certain amount of small or cracked cherries, because they go through like a little bit of a pressure test, I think, too. And anyways, there's a whole process there too. But yeah, that's interesting. So I don't know if I realized there was 10,000 chickens in that barn, but
yep.
So a lot of my listeners, I'm assuming, or will be like homesteader type individuals that may have a coop of at most 50 chickens, maybe 25, maybe 10 chickens, where they have little areas that have pasture and maybe some grass raised. Do you guys ever let the chickens out anywhere, or what was kind of like their living arrangements?
They couldn't get out of their cage. There was usually 1 to 2 per cage.
I think if I remember right, they're not very big cages. I mean, they were 3 feet by 3 feet or something like that.
Yeah, if that. They were usually white leghorns is what they used in the chickens barns there.
White leghorns are a breed that are known to be heavy egg producers. They're not like your meat birds. So if you're listening and you want to have a really high productive chicken, a leghorn is one of those species that work really well. So they were fairly confined, and on the farm now we have like a little run, you call it, a chicken run, I guess, where they can get out and dig around in the dirt and eat the minerals and all that stuff, and eat some grubs and worms and things. So that's interesting. Do you guys have any other type of animals or livestock on the farm?
So we did dairy also, so we milked cows. So another chore of mine was to take the calves, the dairy calves that were on the bottle, and teach them how to drink from a pail. I think it's because my brothers probably didn't have enough patience to try and do that, because you had to have a lot of patience to teach a calf how to drink from a bottle to a pail. Yeah,
I could imagine, because every once in a while we had a bottle calf at the farm, and boy, if you weren't careful when you're little, those calves come at you with some gusto. And you have this big bottle. It's like imagine a milk cart, half-gallon milk carton you buy in the store, and put a nipple on it, and then wait for this, 100-pound, 100-pound calf, I guess, probably about the right size, coming after you, and then just going to town on that bottle. It's a lot of force behind that calf's neck and head and stuff. I get tipped over a couple times, I think, or bottle knocked out of my hand or whatever. But I never tried teaching them how to drink out of a bucket. So that's surprising to me that you teach them how to drink out of a bucket.
Yep, dairy cows are a little different because they don't stay with the moms. They usually get put into a different pen, and so they start off with the bottle, and then after a while you let them lick on your finger, and then you gotta stick their head in the pail so they can start kind of sucking on your finger and the liquid in the pail at the same time. So you'd have like milk replacer that you would use for that. But yeah, they get a little bucky. Sometimes the pails will go flying.
Yeah, that's right. And that's pretty standard practice for dairy farming, is that they usually have the calf. It may be with the mom for a couple of days until they get off, or is it pretty much right instantly that next day they pretty much take them to a calf hut and raise them with the other calves. And so then that way they keep the cow lactating and use all the milk or the produce to go into the bulk tank to get shipped out to be sent to stores and everything. So
when I was real little, I think they had, some pigs as well. And then we had a little coop that was probably for chickens that we would butcher. So that was completely separate from the chicken barn.
That one was just to the east of the house, right?
North.
Very big.
I don't think it was there anymore when you were around, but...
Yeah, there was some small building that they demolished after a while. We went and took one little look at it before they tore it down for something. That was up by the barn.
There was actually a big red dairy barn where they didn't have, like, the pipeline and stuff in it.
Oh.
When Dad first started milking. So then you use cream cans. So your milk would go into the cream cans, and then Dad took them into the co-op to wherever it needed to go in the cream cans. Most of the cream cans now, they just use for decoration. They don't use them for milk anymore. So,
that's true, yeah.
Yeah.
Is the barn that's currently there the original barn?
No,
is that there?
So that was built in like 1972-ish, somewhere around there. So then the red barn, then we just used for like extra livestock or the ones that weren't getting milk, the younger ones. And then the other barn then had the pipeline in it where it would go from the cow, from the milker, into the pipeline and then into this big bulk tank where it would stay cooled until the milk truck would come like every other day to pick up the milk.
So at what point in the timeline with how old you were when that other barn was built?
So that would have been, I suppose I was probably around like 5 or 6.
Yeah, so the most time you were spent on the farm, you had been familiar with that new barn.
The new one, yep, yeah.
Okay.
And there were tie stalls, so the cows would come in, they knew where their place was, except for if they were a new cow, then they had to learn that, but they would come in and they'd have a little collar around their neck, and then we would just snap the chain on so they wouldn't go wandering around, and they'd get their feed to eat while we milked them, and Dad would even play music for them to keep them happy. He played polka music for them. Maybe the rosary would come on the Albany station, depending upon what time of the day it was that we were milking.
Holy cows. Is that where the saying comes from? Holy cow! That's funny. I always thought it was interesting how you can get cows to kind of come in and go into the same feeding stall each time. Today's dairies, it's crazy. You can basically have a certain diet for a specific cow if you wanted to. If you wanted to run certain type of experiments to see if a certain type of feed would influence a cow, the cows come to the same spot each time, so you can literally do a specialized diet for each individual cow if you wanted to, and to figure out what kind of feed's best. And yeah, it's pretty crazy the technology they have for dairies these days.
Yeah.
I guess maybe in the future here I'll get a actual dairy farmer currently is a dairy farmer on the podcast just to talk about his daily routine. I think would be interesting and amaze a lot of people about what these dairy farmers have to go through daily to put milk on your guys' table. So that'd be an interesting topic for another day too. So it sounds like you kind of had a lot of similar experiences to Dad, except for maybe you didn't have sheep ever.
My mom had a very large garden as well, so we also raised all the vegetables and stuff like that. And yep.
Yeah, did you guys have any horses ever?
No.
So you went and chased cows by foot.
Yep.
Did you have beef cows once in a while too, or no?
I don't recall any beef cows unless it was just a couple, maybe to butcher later.
So the dairy cows, unlike the chickens, got to go on pasture and graze, and you guys would chase them in or to a different pasture, bring them in for milking and things like that. I remember you telling me a story one time where you and Kathy had to go chase cows because they got out or something, but it was also wintertime. And what I remember you telling me the story was that, and this goes for the same way I was grew up, like, if I was sleeping and you hear Dad yell downstairs, "Get up, the cows are out!" You're like, okay, you're literally grabbing your pajamas, maybe slipping on a pair of pants real quick, and you're putting your socks on and grabbing your boots as you're going upstairs, and you're out that door in like a minute, And I think Grandpa Lawrence is probably the similar type of individual where if he yelled at you to come chase the cows, you guys just came out and did it, right off the bat, right? And So I remember you telling me a story one time where the cows got out and Grandpa Lawrence was just like, "Hey, come and get the cows." And maybe Grandpa wasn't alive at the time. Maybe it was one of your brothers that were getting after you. But I remember you saying that you didn't even have time to put your boots on. So you ran outside, there's a couple inches of snow on the ground. But you knew that you could keep your feet warm by stepping in the cow pies, running around the pasture, trying to chase them around.
Yeah. You got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, I'm just picturing my aunt and my mom just running around the pasture chasing cows, trying to find, cow pies, piles of crap to step in to keep your feet warm as you're running around chasing cows. It's funny. But so that's how I grew up chasing cows, was by foot. We didn't have horses like my dad did. So anytime we had to bring them to the pasture or bring them to the corral to get some shots or give them some medicine or anything like that, we're on foot, and we had 3 or 4 of us usually, and sometimes you chase them and they get away, and then you got to circle back and chase them all over again. So there's definitely a couple times where I know Dad wanted to chase them in the morning before the school bus came, and boy, some days we almost didn't make it. But so you mentioned a garden. I'm trying to think of where the garden was on the farm there.
So we had one spot. It would have been just to the south of the house that's there now.
Okay.
And then there was a larger garden, like to the west of that chicken barn.
Oh, and that little pasture where Joel always puts his hay bales and stuff.
Yep, yeah. So that was the biggest one there, yeah.
Yeah, so I mentioned Joel. He's a college friend of my dad. Ended up buying my grandma's place after my uncle Roger had stopped farming. So he bought the place from Roger. So my dad's kind of fortunate he had a friend of his be able to buy the farm there. So that's kind of a cool dynamic.
I mean, I was glad to have somebody that I knew, buy it.
Yeah.
And when Roger decided that he wasn't going to farm anymore, we were already here. So it's not like we could buy that farm too,
Yeah, that'd been tough. But so I do remember some summers where my grandma Rosina, my mom's mom here, now that they lived in town, my mom had her own farm. My mom also had a big garden, and I remember my grandma Rosina, she coming over and helping weed in the garden and helping like big canning days. She'd be in the kitchen, we'd go pick beans, and grandma would be in the kitchen, or mom would be in the kitchen starting to heat up water, and we'd be having basically a big canning party, whether it was corn, husking corn off, or cutting the beans and putting them in cans and all that type of stuff. I do remember kind of as, I don't know if I always enjoyed those days, to be honest. I mean, sometimes you're just sitting there cutting beans forever, or stripping the corn off the husk or peeling the corn husk. That's the worst. You peel the corn husk and you're filling a 5-gallon pail after 5-gallon pail, feeding them to the pigs and stuff. But as you get older, you learn to have a little more appreciation for those types of things. But I do kind of remember when Grandma Rosina started slowing down a little bit. She started slowing down, coming out weeding a little less. And I don't know, maybe I missed having Grandma around a little bit more often, weeding together or whatever. But it's kind of one of those deals where I must have been the right age where you just kind of noticed that Grandma started slowing down and started doing less gardening. But so yeah, I can maybe attribute some of my affinity for gardening and things to Grandma and my mom, who did a lot of that. I'd say Dad was out there every once in a while weeding when us good kids didn't quite keep up with it or something like that. But for the most part, I remember Mom being the primary gardener. So that's kind of where I get my affinity from gardening from. My dad grew up with a 20-cow dairy, and so I'm curious how did yours compare growing up? Like how many did you and your brothers help take care of?
I think it was probably 30, 35. So in between there, and once in a while you'd have some of them that were dried up waiting to calves. So anywhere between 30 and 40, I would say.
Okay, so maybe a little bit bigger dairy operation than what my dad grew up with. But Dad then again also had a lot more beef cows, so there was a little bit more to manage there. But yeah, so Mom was a little bit more involved with the chickens and the dairy, and then like they said, a couple hogs here and there. But otherwise, my mom and dad kind of grew up in similar fashion there. But so as I was interviewing Dad, I guess for his last podcast the other day, he brought up the topic of you getting proposed to, and so maybe it's not so much for my listeners, but maybe more so for any future nieces and nephews or grandkids that listen to this. Do you recall how the proposal went? What Dad do, and how he responded? I barely remember this myself, so for my own wedding, my own marriage and engagement. But if you can think about it, that'd be kind of cool, something to share.
Well, I just wasn't positive. We were pretty young yet. I was only 19, so those kinds of things, they're for life. So you got to be positive.
Did he at least get down on one knee?
I don't honestly remember. He actually got down on a knee, or if he just proposed. It wasn't how like they have prom proposals nowadays. They got to get out a big poster and everything else, to ask for prom. So
I know. I started catching some of those on Facebook or whatever, and they're doing some big prom proposals, and I'm like, gosh, it kind of dumbs down puts less meaning on the wedding proposal when you get to that point in life. You have to do all these prom proposals. I don't know. Kind of weird to me, but maybe my listeners will appreciate that. I don't know. But do you remember the time and the place, or?
I believe we were down by the Little Falls Dam, late afternoon.
Yeah, those of you who don't know the Little Falls Dam, that's a dam that actually has the Mississippi going through it, and to the north of that dam, by Itasca State Park isn't where the Mississippi starts.
Yeah.
And so it's only hop, skip, and jump. I mean, I don't know, a couple 100 miles maybe from the Little Falls Dam to the head of the Mississippi. So I always remember my Aunt Kathy always bringing us there as kids just to watch the river flow over the dam and just create huge splashes of water. And that was something that my Aunt Kathy always did all the time when we went and visited, bringing us to the dam. So it has some other memories for you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Mom, do you have one particular story or thing on the farm that you really remember or enjoy that you'd like to share?
I enjoy being in the outdoors more so than inside. So like growing the plants or having that fort out in the woods. Trapping pocket gophers with my brothers. One thing that I could say that you probably don't want to do is when you hear roosters crowing, do not crow back, because you're not sure what you're telling them. And they will come and attack you, even if you're in your Sunday dress.
Yeah, I think my mom has a pretty good scar on her shin from a rooster. They're not always the most docile creatures, so yeah, that's a good word of wisdom. All right, Mom. Well, thanks for kind of sharing your story there a little bit. I definitely learned a couple new things along the way here. It's kind of fun. So, yeah. So, from us listeners, you kind of heard a little bit about my dad's story, my mom's story. We're going to kind of get into me and my family kind of growing up here on my mom and dad's farm, and probably get into a little more detail about some of the specific stories and things like that. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for listening. If you have any questions, shoot me an email at homegrownfam@gmail.com. Otherwise, until next time.